Okay, so it's kind of an open secret here, and it's not hidden in the slightest that I call out the U.S. bishops all the time for their playing footsie with Caesar. Not because they have a close relationship with the state. The whole separation of church and state thing is a Protestant idea born from their revolt against Christ. It's not a Catholic idea. The separation of church and state is not even a constitutional idea, strictly speaking. The whole concept of it comes from a letter Thomas Jefferson wrote as president to a Baptist church, the Danbury Baptist specifically. The First Amendment merely says that Congress won't establish a religion. It says nothing about the government working with Christian organizations to achieve positive policy outcomes. Most of the founding fathers of the country identified in some way or another as Christians, even though the case could easily be made that they weren't exactly the most observant of Christians. Famously, Benjamin Franklin once said that of his Catholic priest traveling companion, that he was his favorite Catholic because that priest barely spoke about religion at all. This problem among the clergy hasn't exactly been a new thing in the United States history. But the objection that I have to these bishops working with Caesar is this: the US government is, well, evil, to put it mildly, full stop. The government promotes grave harm around the world and here at home, using our taxes to do so, often disguised as charity. Just look at how we've exported that sin that James Martin has an unholy interest in. We've exported impure Hollywood cultural subversion, and of course, the sacrifice of the youngest and most vulnerable to the demon Moloch under the guise of personal liberty, as well as, again, that sin that James Martin has an interest in, tied directly to poor countries receiving federal funding or not if they don't play ball. I don't want the church involved with that stuff at all, but it has found itself inseparably linked to those very same programs. The Lepanto Institute has tirelessly worked to expose this, and the bishops never respond to what they say. But at the core of this is a question of hypocrisy. The church tells Catholics to be involved in politics, to use the political process to stop evil political practices from happening or stopping ones that are happening already. But is it hypocritical to support imperfect political candidates, even when they stand for things that the faith is opposed to? No. And a good example of this is President Trump and his fast and loose playing with the life issue, especially on the IVF thing. Even though he is in fact not even a Catholic, but the teaching of the church is pretty clear that it's not hypocrisy to do this. The church tells us we can't support candidates or parties who are openly in support of grave evils unless it's a matter that the other party or the other option is far worse than them. Then at that point, we're just trying to stop evil from triumphing. And that does leave us in a quandary as Catholics. Many Catholics say they won't vote at all because lesser of two evils is still supporting evils. I tend to defer to the church on this, but all this is a long-winded way of asking this question. Are the priests and high-profile laity who went to President Donald Trump's resort home at Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago hypocrites? So you might not be aware about this. There was an invitation-only event at Mar-a-Lago. That's Trump's resort home in Florida. He was not there, but a number of high-profile Catholics attended. I believe Taylor Marshall was there. Father Dave Nix was there. Bishop Strickland was there, and he's the focus of this, but there were a whole host of others, Jack Posobiec and some others, and Holy Mass was offered, the benediction, all sorts of things were offered there, but it was also a get-together and almost like a conference, and happened at Mar-a-Lago. Does this make those people who did that hypocrites? I don't think it does, but I'm sure there will be people who disagree. So go ahead and, if you want to, in the comments, disagree or defend that they are not hypocrites. Just if you're going to debate people, please do so in charity. Come on. But one figure who was there is the subject of the ire of Catholic media personalities, and that is, of course, Bishop Strickland. I covered Bishop Strickland's recent letter that he wrote from Mar-a-Lago, and that is the subject of this. We go to the pillar with this headline. Strickland criticizes Pope over siren call of the sin that James Martin has a peculiar interest in for a priest in Mar-a-Lago letter. You can't obviously use that word there on any of the platforms, unfortunately. Trust me, I've seen what happens when you do. But the entire question here is he a hypocrite? Because that's kind of what they're getting at. That, oh, you weren't supposed, you get upset when Catholics are supporting Democratic candidates, but here you are blindly supporting Republicans. And the easy counter argument to that is, especially if you're aware that in the last few days, Bishop Strickland wrote a letter about the conflict in the Holy Land to President Trump and said what the things he was supporting there were gravely evil. And I would challenge anybody, even if you disagree fundamentally with what Bishop Strickland is saying there, I would challenge anybody to suggest that that the position he takes as generally being supportive of what the president is doing, to being anywhere the same as, I don't know, Pastor Jimmy Martin saying, lauding Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the things they had been doing. It's not the same, because there was never recognition of evil when it was happening. And there was never recognition of the fact that that super duper Catholic president was not really all that Catholic, as we ended up seeing at the very end of his presidency when he became a stonecutter publicly. He apostatized, essentially. But here's the details from the article so you can see the thrust of what they're getting at here. Quote, Bishop Joseph Strickland invited priests this month to join a prayerful community of fraternity while criticizing Pope Francis for apparently failing, quote, to reject the siren call of that sin that James Martin has a peculiar interest in. They say apparently here as a way of denigrating even the claim, because the pillar has also a peculiar track record of defending Francis and not recognizing reality when it's presented to them. Let's continue. The invitation came in a letter distributed by the former Bishop of Tyler, Texas, given to priests who attended a March 19th gathering of Catholics at President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. As we lift up Pope Francis and all the bishops in prayer, we must do so with abundant charity, but also with unyielding clarity in the truth, Strickland wrote. If the Holy Father and the many cardinals, bishops, and priests who clamored at his side refuse to reject the siren call of that sin, we must remain steadfast. True mercy toward our brothers in holy orders demands that we tirelessly call them back to the truth, regardless of how deaf their ears may remain to our pleas. The bishop invoked for priests the example of St. Peter Damian, a fearless defender of truth who stood against the corruption of his time. He lived in an age much like our own, when the rot of that sin was like an acid eating away at the church. Strickland's letter comes more than a year after the bishop was removed in November 2023 as Bishop of Tyler, Texas. While the Holy See did not state a reason for his removal, Strickland had tweeted months ago before his removal that it is time for me to say that I reject Pope Francis's program of undermining the deposit of faith. Since his removal, the bishop has appeared twice outside of U.S. Bishops' Conference meetings, leading the rosary and greeting supporters. End quote. And he goes on to talk about how Francis gets really cozy with evil, really cozy. And again, the pillar kind of dismisses the core claim. It says this is apparently in relation to Francis's document Fiducia Supplicans, and then goes on to say how Francis was very clear that document doesn't bless the James Martin pairings and its unholy parody of holy matrimony, which is not even true. It clearly does bless those relationships. If you read the document, it clearly does. But I'm very curious about this because this is part of I want to say larger, but this article happened, and about the same time, other articles happened as well. The pillar has this appearance of being above the fray, being kind of non-ideological. We're mildly conservative, they present themselves as, but we are very loyal to Pope Francis. We wouldn't dare criticize him, but we will publish articles that show how bad things are in Rome. That kind of thing. They have an air of credibility. But they then feed into outlets that don't have credibility. For example, this article has led some, frankly, mid-wit Bergoglian Catholic media outlets to denounce Bishop Strickland as schismatic. And so we go to a website whose name I make fun of. It's called Where Peter Is. I often call it Where Did I Leave Peter? Because this is just a out-and-out Bergoglian website with the headline, Strickland, Altman, and the Making of a Parallel Church. That's incredible because it's Francis who's making a parallel church, that ape of the Church of Catholic Prophecy. If he's not the one making those prophecies from various mystics throughout Catholic history, hinted at in the messages of Our Lady at various Marian apparitions, Lourdes, even hinted at it, La Salette and some others. If Francis isn't the one making it, it's a future figure, then may the Lord have mercy on us when that happens, because it's Francis who's making the ape of the church with his new synodal church. But here, Mike Lewis is accusing Pope Francis, or not for Pope Francis, Bishop Strickland and Father James Altman of making a parallel church. And part of it is because they were at Mar-a-Lago. Here are the details. Quote, recent videos uploaded to YouTube have revealed that on March 20th, 2025, Bishop Joseph Strickland, emeritus of the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, celebrated a public mass at Mary Mother of the Light Maronite Catholic Church in Tequesta, Florida. The mass was followed by a reflection delivered by Strickland and a dinner in the parish hall, marking a notable gathering of controversial Catholic figures. This event took place against a backdrop of ecclesiastical restrictions and theological disputes, as well as highly politicized movement in the U.S. Catholic Church that opposes Pope Francis while promoting President Donald Trump. Let's pause here. That is an interesting framing. Their opposition to Pope Francis is at odds with their supporting this now sitting president of the United States. That's an interesting framing, and I don't know if it was intentional or not. Among the celebrants of the Mass were Father James Altman, a priest from the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin, whose removal from active ministry in July 2021 by Bishop William Callahan stemmed from a series of polarizing statements. Altman gained national prominence in August 2020 when he released a widely circulated video asserting that Catholics could not support the Democratic Party due to you cannot be Catholic and be a Democrat, period. This type of rhetoric, coupled with his subsequent abrasive sedevacantism, a position rejecting the validity of Pope Francis's pontificate, pause here, flag on the play, Altman is not a sedevacantist. In fact, Mike Lewis just defined sedevacantism as a position rejecting the validity of Pope Francis's pontificate. That is not what sedevacantism is. And this is why I object strenuously to the Benny Plenists, or Benny Papists, if you want to be a little degrading about it, those who believe that Benedict XVI's resignation was either invalid because he was pressured to do so, or invalid because of the way he worded it with intention, or some other myriad reason for believing that his resignation was invalid. That does not make you a sedevacantist. To believe Francis is an anti-pope does not make you a sedevacantist. A sedevacantist is someone who believes that every pope since 1958 has been an anti-pope heretic. A sedevacantist generally believes that the new Mass is invalid, the new sacraments, including holy orders and confession, are invalid. I guarantee you, Father James Altman does not think his ordination to the priesthood was invalid. Thank you very much. But they use the word sedevacantism here as an attack dog thing, as a dog whistle. It's what they do. They try to make you not even consider anything he has to say because he's a sedevacantist. I'm going to give you a good example of this as a counter argument. I'm not a sedevacantist. I disagree with them. I don't think sedevacantists are bad. I think some sedevacantists are pretty rotten, but like any other human being grouping out there, you could find bad apples in all of them. One of the best books on the Mass, the changes to the Mass in the Novus Ordo, was written by a sedevacantist priest, the late Father Anthony Cicada, who wrote a book called The Work of Human Hands. That book has been lauded by non-sedevacantist theologians as being the best book on the development of the new Mass ever written. Go find a copy if you want to know the changes they made to the Mass. If you can find a copy, because that book has not been in reprint to my knowledge. Anyway, Altman's sedevacantism suggests that he has incurred latae sententia, automatic excommunication for schism under Canon 1364 of the Code of Canon Law. Now, Lewis is not declaring him to be excommunicated. He is merely suggesting that he has been excommunicated. Although no official decree has been released to the public, there's also been no public statement from the Diocese of La Crosse indicating Altman's reinstatement, with his out-of-ministry status reaffirmed as recently as 2023 by Bishop Carl Kim of Wichita, where Altman spoke as part of an unauthorized, canceled priest event. Joining Strickland and Altman as concelebrants were Father Gary George, CSSR, the pastor of the Maronite parish, and Father John Perez, identified as a Catholic chaplain to the West Palm Beach VA hospital. The event's organizer, Willie Gordiola, self-styled as Willie G, uploaded a video to YouTube explaining the choice of venue. The Maronite Church was purportedly the only Catholic church in the state of Florida that could host Bishop Strickland because of the powers that be. End quote. And then he goes on to suggest that this is going to cause division in the church by essentially the Maronites falsely advertising the nature and purpose of the event. For those of you who follow follow Bishop Strickland and wonder sometimes, if it's okay to do so, if there's any risks involved. There you see the risks. That is the risk because the bishops he cited there will tell you not to go. They'll tell you not to watch podcasts like this one. They'll tell you not to pay attention to those bishops and priests, to just be good little Bergoglians and go be marched off the cliff by the Pied Piper in white in Rome into the new synodal religion. That's what they will tell you. Of course, President Trump himself looms over this. See, the bishops have been apoplectic over losing their federal funding and highlight cases taken out of context or fabricating a false context about particular immigration cases to turn Catholics back to supporting the Democratic Party. And that is what this is partially about, because you get them supporting the party again, guess what happens? They win elections and they get money as a result, because this is about them serving mammon. That's all this is. We go here to get a case in point. Pastor Jimmy Martin of the Jesuit Church posting an excerpt from a New York Times article, Unbounded Cruelty. This is a quote, leaving out a lot of context out of something going on because the New York Times can't trust anything they publish. But basically, this is about a rule change to legal counsel being offered by the federal government at taxpayer cost to those in the United States illegally. James Martin calls this unbounded cruelty, and he does what liberals always do. He highlights the case of kids caught up in this, meaning he's highlighting out of context the most extreme example that could be found, disregarding the fact that these same children were brought in illicitly for often unspeakably evil purposes that it looks really bad for a Catholic priest to be defending. I can't believe I have to say this to them. It's McCarrick all over again. What it looks like from the outside, and I've had this said to me many times, it looks like the priests and the bishops of the church are finding a new way to get back to some old sins that they couldn't get away with. That's what it looks like. Do you have any idea what you're doing to the church, Father Martin, when you're doing this? Stop defending this. It's evil. You harm the church. You cause grave scandal. Those most vulnerable, most young, should go home to their families or to their next of kin. They certainly do not belong in a system that is proficient at making them disappear in the hundreds of thousands of cases in the past few years. Now, not one to shy away from controversy in all of this is Bishop Strickland himself, who doubled down in an interview. He went after actually the Novus Ordo Mass and Vatican II inspired reforms of the church, which he says have led to the church being complacent and comfortable, with a new focus in the church by the bishops of turning the church into an NGO. So we go here to LifeSite for this headline. Bishop Strickland, Novus Ordo Mass, priestly formation have led to problems in the church. And he's not wrong. Everything, the purpose at Vatican II. They said this. The popes at the time said this. The bishops said this. The big defenders of the council said this, that it was turning inward towards man. It was a man-focused council. They said that, and they thought that was a good idea. And this is what happens when you have a man-oriented council that tells people that everything about the Mass should be about you, that your validity of attending the Mass should be about you, and then the church's orientation to the world, stopping opposing the spread of sin and allying itself with the government, is about man-centered everything, theology, everything is man-centered. It's why so many of them simply say that the church must focus on material things. That's why migration is the big issue right now. Before that, it was Laudato Si and all the green stuff. It was about making a better world, and has reduced the church to being a glorified NGO. From the article, quote, Bishop Joseph Strickland said the shift of the Novus to the Novus Ordo Mass from the traditional Latin Mass has led to a decline in the priesthood, and called out the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops for pushing bishops to forget that they're successors of the apostles. The former bishop of Tyler, Texas, who was removed from his diocese by Pope Francis in 2023 after criticizing the Pope's heterodoxy, faulted the more comfortable and less sacral approach of the Novus Ordo Mass in a more than 3-hour interview on March 20th with Conor Gallagher, the CEO to the traditional Catholic publisher Tan Books. And in that is the interview embedded. I will have a link to this article in my show notes at returntotradition.org after this, if you would like to watch the interview for yourself. In the interview, Strickland recounted his upbringing in the small, overwhelmingly Protestant town of Atlanta in East Texas, where he attended Mass as a child at a mission church that his parents helped establish. When he had time and town to kill, he said, I just went to the church and prayed. Nobody told me that's a good thing to do. I just knew, because being Catholic was the best thing we had as a family. Strickland noted in the interview that he begins each day with 1 hour of Eucharistic adoration and as many as 3 hours a day as Bishop of Tyler. He credits adoration and Holy Rosary with giving him the strength to stand up against corrupt church authorities and to say, well, okay, if you have to remove me, that's what will happen. But I'm not going to backpedal on the truth that I believe Christ is telling us to teach and to share. Bishop Strickland attributed the crisis in the modern church to the desacralization of the Mass and to formation that envisions priests as social workers. The problems in the church really are rooted in many ways in the formation of priests to be active, out there, doing good things, setting up food pantries and doing all this stuff. And having this program and that program and another program, he said. However, Strickland revealed that he came to understand through a deepening of his prayer life that being a priest primarily happens at the Eucharistic altar. That is the core, that is the lifeblood, that is the epicenter of a priest's life, he stressed, though he wasn't taught that. It wasn't really the emphasis. It was, kind of a church that had been desacralized in many ways, he lamented, including with the abandonment of the traditional form of the Mass. Now, as an aside, Bishop Strickland's not a traditionalist. He has said that he's learning how to say the traditional Mass, that he offers it now, but he's still kind of learning it. He had to learn it on his own. He is by no stretch a traditionalist. He's just kind of above the ideological side of things. Strickland's comments echo Venerable Pope Pius XII, who said, quote, there are indeed many forms of activity that a priest can exercise for the salvation of the modern world, but only one of them is without a doubt the most worthy, the most effective, and the most lasting in its effect, to act as a dispenser of the Holy Eucharist after first nourishing himself abundantly. His work would not be that of a priest if he, even through zeal for souls, put his Eucharistic vocation second, Pope Pius XII said. Strickland said that in the wake of the Second Vatican Council and the introduction of the Novus Ordo Mass, quote, I think all of that really began to shift the priesthood more into being a social worker, a good man, and doing good things, but not being a priest of Jesus Christ. There are lots of factors, but I think that one of the critical is, the liturgy was not as sacral. That was the objective. Make it simpler, make it more something comfortable with this world. It's not this mystical event every Sunday, it really is, but that was the emphasis, and I think that's bled into what priests do, what bishops do, he observed. Strickland explained that he was trained very much as a Novus Ordo priest, describing the new Mass as bare-bones Eucharistic sacrifice, and even sacrifice wasn't emphasized, it was the communal gathering. There's more to that. He goes on to say that the traditional Mass will always be available no matter what they try to do. I suggest you read that, or go, if you have 3 hours to kill, go watch that. It's a great interview. And he puts into words something that a lot of us have a harder time communicating, which is the crisis in the church. This synodality nonsense can be tied directly to the liturgical reforms. All of it can be, because of the turning away from the sacred to the material. You see it in every aspect of Francis's pontificate, and frankly, the ones before. It's just things are way worse under Francis, because he's not trying is going to look like if they ever get their way. Now, I'm going to respond to something here by shifting here. The following story goes out to everyone who says that I do not cover good news. People say I don't cover good news. I do absolutely cover good news. It's just that good news is very, very rare in the church today. But I have some good news for you today. Amazingly, and by all accounts, it looks like a miracle happened in the United States in the last few months and is now being made public. A woman in the United States invoked the name of a blessed on his way to canonization for healing, specifically the healing of tumors she had. This soon-to-be canonized saint has not yet been canonized, but if there's any justice in this, the Vatican will examine this and will do so in an honest way. Miraculously, the woman, after she and her family invoked prayers for intercession, was healed of tumors. That's that's what we call a little in your face as healings go. So we go to Catholic Vote with this headline. Teens' tumors vanish after prayers to Blessed Solanus Casey, a possible final miracle for canonization. Published just very recently. This is not an old story by any stretch. The young woman involved is a woman named Mary Bartold. She's like a sophomore at a Catholic high school. Here are the details. A Michigan teenager's unexplained healing after prayers to Blessed Solanus Casey could become the miracle the church needs to declare the beloved Capuchin friar a saint. 16-year-old Mary Bartold from DeWitt was facing surgery after doctors discovered tumors on both her ovaries in May 2024, the Detroit Free Press reported. As she prepared for what could have been a life-changing operation, her parents, Susan and Rick Bartold, turned to prayer, making a pilgrimage to the Solanus Casey Center in Detroit and initiating a novena for his intercession. Mary, a sophomore at Lansing Catholic High School, had first experienced sharp abdominal pain during school in late April. I was toppled over, she recalled. I couldn't move at all because it hurt so bad. When the pain persisted, concern deepened. A CAT scan and ultrasound revealed alarming results. There was a 7.3 centimeter mass on Mary's left ovary and a 1.5 centimeter mass on the right. Doctors feared ovarian torsion, an emergency that could result in loss of her reproductive organs. The possibility devastated Mary. All she could say to us was, "I want to be a mom," Susan remembered. And even though we understand that there are other ways to be a beautiful mother, for a 16-year-old, it was really, really hard. Let's pause here. Note what the family did. They went to a shrine. They started a prayer campaign. That's what a novena is, to Blessed Solanus Casey. Solanus Casey. My pronunciation isn't great, but that is what they did. They turned to prayer when the material solution failed. If the Vatican investigates this, they will find hostile experts, medical experts who are not Catholics typically, who will look to see if this could have been done through material means. If her miraculous healing was possible through the normal course of life events. As you'll see, they were flabbergasted too, at least the ones that she was interacting with. Back to the article, quote, physicians at the University of Michigan determined the masses were teratomas, tumors typically benign but still requiring surgical removal. The procedure was scheduled for August 2nd, 2024. Trusting in the power of prayer, the Bartolds visited the Solanus Casey Center July 6th, asking not only for Mary's healing, but also that she be granted the grace to travel this road that the Lord had put before her, Susan said. Mary's family also rallied others in the community to join them in novena to Blessed Solanus. Then came July 30th, Blessed Solanus' feast day. Mary underwent an MRI early that morning. As Susan drove her to the appointment, she prayed aloud, "Solanus, this is your feast day. I know you have big news." That evening, Susan saw the results of Mary's patient portal. It appeared the tumors were gone. The next day, Mary's doctors called and confirmed it. She was just like, "There's nothing there. It's all gone," Susan recalled. The doctor apologized for the delay in calling, explaining she had consulted with multiple radiologists to be absolutely certain before sharing the news. "I really wanted to make sure that I was telling you the correct news," Mary's doctor had said. "We were good to cancel the surgery." "Thought it was a mistake," she said, but when the reality sank in, her response was simple. "I was just grateful I didn't have to have surgery." End quote. And afterwards, her family went back to the tomb of Blessed Solanus and prayed in thanksgiving for his intercession. They have then since taken the records of all of this and sent them to the diocese to hope that they'll communicate this to the Vatican to investigate. I want to be a bit of a downer and a good news story, but the guidelines on Marian apparitions give you an idea of how they'll handle this, which is to say, Cardinal Fernandez of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith has said, so we shall see how they respond to this. If you want a good prayer campaign, I would recommend you pray a novena for the that the Vatican will investigate this with the appropriate rigor, and they would be willing, if the facts lead them to believe that this was divine intercession, divine intervention in this, that they confirm this as a miracle, if that's where the facts lead them. Remember, the truth must prevail in these things. If you're not familiar with Blessed Casey, he is not very many Americans have been canonized, but he is definitely on his way. He's called the Wonder Worker. It's also from Catholic Vote. Here are the details of who this is. This is not very long at all, much shorter than the previous Catholic vote piece. First, people lined up in Yonkers, then in Harlem, Detroit, and Brooklyn. Always those lines led to the same man, Father Solanus Casey, the Capuchin wonder worker. Born Bernard Casey in 1870, the future priest grew up in a 3-room log cabin with his parents and 15 siblings. With morning and evening prayer said daily, a rosary prayed nightly, and regular chores, life in that Wisconsin cabin wasn't all that different from life in a monastery. Yet not until he was 21 and had worked as a lumberjack, hospital orderly, prison guard, and streetcar operator did Casey consider religious life. At first, he pursued the diocesan priesthood, but the seminary he entered offered classes in only German and Latin. Speaking neither, Casey fell behind academically. When the rector suggested monastic life, Casey went to Detroit to study with the Capuchins. He was finally ordained to the priesthood on July 24th, 1904, but due to his ongoing academic struggles, his ordination was an ordinatio simplex, meaning he could say Mass but not preach publicly or hear confessions. Casey, however, was happy. He was a priest. That fall, Casey took up his first assignment as sacristan and doorkeeper at Sacred Heart Parish in Yonkers, New York. There, the miracles began. People would come to the monastery with some sort of trouble. Casey, as the doorkeeper, would greet them and talk with them. He would then enroll them in the Capuchin Seraphic Mass Association. With remarkable frequency, healing followed. Some days, the people who lined up to see Casey numbered more than 200. In every city he served, the priest met them all. For 53 years, Casey spent his days talking with visitors and his nights in prayer. By the time of his death in 1957, the Capuchins had filled 7 notebooks with accounts of cancers cured, kidneys healed, limbs made whole, and infertility vanquished, all through the intercession of the man who Pope Francis named blessed on November 18th, 2017. His beatification took place at Ford Field in Detroit before an estimated crowd of 60,000 people. That's an American hero. The president is talking about having this garden of American heroes, and there are some Catholic figures going to be in there, including Fulton Sheen. I don't know if Father Casey will be in there, but if he's not, he should be. But I'm curious what you think about this story. Let me know. Do you have any hope that the Vatican will investigate this properly, including being willing to attribute miracles if need be? Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It truly does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. Say a prayer to Blessed Father Casey for this, and as always, pray for the church. I am Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.